In the middle of the night on January 14, 2009, Arizona's emergency services received a call. The caller was a woman so distressed that it was nearly impossible to understand her words. She spoke quickly and incoherently. The dispatcher tried to ask her questions, at least to learn her name, but the only word she could make out was, "Help." Then the call was disconnected. The dispatcher called back, and the same terrified, incoherent voice answered before the line went dead again. Quickly, the dispatcher traced the call's location and sent police officers to the address. But before they arrived, a third call came in. It was the same woman, asking simply, "Are they coming?" Then out of nowhere, she added, "He was choking me." The dispatcher asked whether he had a weapon, and the woman replied, "Not anymore." Just a few minutes later, police officers pulled up to the house. At the entrance, they were met by a trembling woman. Her face was covered in blood, and she was in such shock that she could barely form a sentence. Beside her stood a man who was doing his best to calm her down. He told the officers that his name was Stanley, or Stan Cook Jr., a family friend who was also temporarily living in the house. The woman next to him, he explained, was Marissa DeVolt. He added that there were 3 children in the home, but they were safe and asleep in their rooms. The officers, alarmed by Marissa's appearance, feared she was injured, but she managed to explain, with difficulty, that it wasn't her blood, it was her husband's, Dale Harrell's. She told them that if they went upstairs, they would find him lying on the floor of their bedroom. That's exactly what the officers did. They rushed to the couple's bedroom, expecting to find an injured man, but nothing could have prepared them for the horror that awaited inside. They had likely never seen so much blood in their lives. It was everywhere, splattered across the walls and ceiling, soaking through the sheets. On a table lay a blood-covered hammer, and on the floor, in a pool of blood, was a man. His skull had been crushed in several places. As one reporter would later describe the injury, there was a fist-sized hole in the man's head. Yet despite the massive blood loss, to everyone's astonishment, Dale was still alive. The officers then focused on speaking with the witnesses, Marissa and Stan, and examining the crime scene. Once Marissa had calmed down a little, she was able to tell them what had happened. She explained that she and her husband had spent half the night arguing because, a month earlier, she had met with a divorce attorney and started the process of ending their marriage. Naturally, Dale hadn't taken the news well. When the argument finally died down, the couple fell asleep for a couple of hours. Marissa said she woke up to find Dale looming over her, his hands around her throat. She lost consciousness, and when she came to, Dale was already covered in blood. As it turned out, Stan had heard the commotion and rushed into their bedroom. He saw Dale on top of Marissa, who was bruised and appeared unconscious. Without giving Dale a chance to react, Stan struck him several times with a hammer. Stan readily confirmed Marissa's story. He said he had struck Dale with the hammer to protect the poor woman, but the investigators began to doubt this version as soon as they started examining the crime scene. First and foremost, the blood spatter didn't match their statements. It indicated that when the attack began, Dale had been lying in bed, alone. There was no way he could have been hovering over his wife and choking her, as Marissa and Stan claimed. There were no signs of a struggle either. Marissa's neck bore only faint scratches, far too minor to match the marks of strangulation, and her fingernails were perfectly manicured and freshly done, something that would have been impossible if she'd fought for her life. The blood pattern also showed that Marissa had been in the bedroom during the attack, while Stan apparently had not been there at all. Had he somehow mastered the art of swinging a hammer from behind a closed door? Forensic analysis of the hammer confirmed the investigators' suspicions. The DNA on it belonged to Marissa, but none of it matched Stan. The investigators were completely puzzled as to why Stan would claim that he had hit Dale with the hammer. Was he trying to cover for Marissa? As it turned out, no, not exactly. Back in 1998, Stan had been in a motorcycle accident that left him with a serious brain injury. As a result, he suffered from short-term memory loss. He could recall things that happened long ago, but not recent events. So when detectives questioned him in more detail about that night, Stan admitted he didn't actually remember anything. But because Marissa was his friend, he trusted her and simply believed her when she told him that he had attacked Dale in order to protect her. To the detectives, that revelation spoke volumes. It suggested that Marissa may have taken advantage of Stan's memory loss to manipulate him. But why would she do that? Searching for the answer, investigators began to dig into the family's personal life. Marissa and Dale were a married couple living a modest life in Gilbert, a quiet suburb of Arizona. The two had first met back in high school, where they briefly dated during their senior years. After graduation, however, their paths diverged dramatically. Marissa gave birth to a daughter, whom she named Rhiannon. Unfortunately, the child's father was never in the picture, and as a young single mother, Marissa struggled, especially financially. Before that, she had worked various service jobs and dreamed of continuing her education. But motherhood forced her to put those plans on hold. In order to make ends meet, Marissa found work at a nightclub. She worked as a dancer, one of those who had to follow a strict less is more dress policy on stage. Despite her circumstances, she didn't abandon her dream of going to college, though she was torn between studying accounting or law. Dale, on the other hand, had always moved steadily toward his goals. He knew exactly what he wanted from life and pursued it with determination. After earning a degree in mechanical engineering, he built a successful career specializing in refrigeration technology. In the early 2000s, fate brought them together again, this time in Phoenix. They reconnected, talked, and soon agreed to meet again. It didn't take long for their renewed friendship to blossom into a romance. By the end of that first month, Marissa and her daughter Rhiannon had become the most important people in Dale's life. Dale and Marissa eventually married, and their family grew with the birth of 2 more daughters, Kieran Harrell and Dinah Harrell. By then, Marissa had long left her job at the club and devoted herself to being a full-time mother. Dale had a stable income and was able to fully support his family. At various times, friends of the family also lived in the Harrells' home. For example, Marissa's friend Amy Dewey stayed with them for several months, occasionally helping the couple take care of the children. After Amy moved out, her room was taken by 31-year-old Stanley Cook Jr. Since Stan often had free time, he also helped out with the kids. By all appearances, he was an ideal housemate, someone who minded his own business and treated the family's privacy with respect. After reviewing the evidence and learning more about the family's background, detectives brought Marissa back to the police station for further questioning. Although only about 12 hours had passed since her 911 call, she appeared completely calm, even cheerful, something that unsettled the investigators. Marissa initially tried to stick to her original story, but when the detective listed all the evidence that contradicted it, she finally admitted that she had been the one to strike her husband with the hammer. However, she claimed she did so only after he had attacked and assaulted her that night. She explained that she had recently been hanging pictures in the bedroom and had left the hammer there. Around 2:30 a.m., as she stepped out of the bathroom, she picked up the hammer and saying, "You don't own me," hit Dale with it. Incredibly, she laughed as she described what happened, saying she found it funny how the hammer went into his head. After landing several blows, she pushed Dale off the bed so she wouldn't have to look at what she had done. It was then, she said, that Stan rushed into the room after hearing the noise and took the hammer from her. Marissa claimed that Dale had been abusive toward her, that he often beat her, constantly complained about their finances, and always wanted more money. She also suspected he had been unfaithful. But friends and acquaintances painted a very different picture of Dale. They described him as calm, patient, and even-tempered. Not extravagant, but devoted to his family. His greatest joy was providing for Marissa and their 3 daughters, spending time with them, and making family memories. Marissa, in contrast, was known to be fiery, impulsive, and careless with money. Whatever funds came into her hands seemed to vanish quickly. Her spending habits often caused tension at home, leading to arguments that ended with shouting and slamming doors, usually Marissa's. Dale, for his part, always tried to make peace. One thing was certain about their marriage: Dale adored his wife. Despite her flaws, he loved her and their children deeply. After her confession, Marissa was arrested, though officers worried it might not be enough to secure a conviction. They still needed solid physical evidence, and, crucially, a motive. Marissa posted bail and returned home, while detectives dove into the family's emails and financial records. What they discovered there did not cast Marissa in a favorable light. Police uncovered a series of financial transactions linked to Marissa that couldn't be explained by her husband's income. Since Marissa herself didn't have a job, this meant she had another secret source of money. And it wasn't just small amounts. The deposits to her account totaled hundreds of thousands of dollars. It didn't take investigators long to discover where the money was coming from. As it turned out, Marissa had been leading a double life, one her husband and friends knew nothing about. Over 2 years earlier, she had registered on a website for The Successful and the Attractive, a dating platform where the men were considered successful and the women young and beautiful. The site still exists today and essentially connects wealthy men with women willing to spend time with them in exchange for financial support. Through the site, Marissa met a man she believed could solve all her financial problems. 56-year-old Alan Flores. Alan was a successful business consultant, eager to spoil his mistress. Their relationship lasted more than 2 years. During that time, he gave Marissa money for gambling, paid her bills, and covered virtually every financial need, real or imagined, she ever had. In total, Marissa received more than $360,000 from him. But despite their arrangement, the relationship between the two lovers was far from perfect. Over the course of 2 years, Alan had grown tired of Marissa's constant financial demands. He wanted the money he had spent on her back, and he was within his rights to do so. While Marissa's time with him had been part of the arrangement she agreed to on the website, her demands had become excessive. To secure repayment, Alan made Marissa sign an IOU and threatened her with legal action if she failed to return the money. Panic set in. Her marriage was at risk. She faced a massive debt, and legal consequences loomed. Marissa was confronted with a harsh choice: face financial ruin or do whatever it took to avoid it. She chose the latter. Of course, Dale, whose income supported 5 people, had life insurance. One policy had been in place for years, but 2 weeks before that fateful night, Marissa had taken out a second policy for $750,000. Combined with the first, this totaled $1.25 million. Marissa decided that this sum would be enough to repay her lover and still leave her with a surplus. While the detectives continued their investigation, Dale remained in critical condition. An emergency surgery had somewhat stabilized him, but he was alive only thanks to life support. He lay in a hospital bed, suspended between life and death, as the rest of his family gathered around him. Weeks passed, but the doctor's prognosis did not improve. On February 9th, both the medical team and the family made the difficult decision to remove Dale from life support. Dale Harrell passed away, surrounded by those who loved him and whom he loved in return. With his death, the charges against Marissa were elevated from assault to murder. Given the increased severity of the case, detectives and the prosecution decided to place her back in custody. But the police didn't have to search for her long. Marissa went to them herself. Just 1 day after her husband's death, she ended up in the hospital. She had gone out for a run as usual when suddenly someone attacked her from behind and beat her. Her injuries were serious, but not life-threatening. She had a broken jaw and a fractured ankle. Police found her just 2 or 3 meters from the road in a dirty, wet tracksuit. After receiving a call from Stan, he knew she had gone for her run, and when she didn't return, grew worried. Given that the attacker likely knew her usual running route, many initially suspected that Stan had assaulted her in revenge. But shortly afterward, Stan walked into the police station and made a statement that left the investigators stunned. Stan admitted that he had beaten Marissa, while investigators had suspected as much. What he revealed next shocked them. He had done it because Marissa asked him to. She was desperate for money. Since she couldn't collect the $1.25 million from her husband's life insurance, as she was now accused of his murder, she refused to give up on the idea of getting funds by any means necessary. She devised a plan B. If Dale's insurance was unattainable, she could claim her own. Marissa discovered a clause in her personal insurance policy. If she became paralyzed due to a spinal injury, she would receive $500,000. She asked Stan to paralyze her. They discussed methods: stabbing her in the back, throwing her off a high-rise, running her over with a car. Shooting was ruled out because it could easily kill her. The car and fall options also seemed too risky. Ultimately, they settled on a sledgehammer. Marissa took a painkiller, and in the bathroom, Stan began hitting her. Occasionally, he paused to support her story that she had gone for a run and that he was trying to call her because he was worried. Afterward, Stan carried the battered Marissa to a car, drove her some distance, and left her by the roadside. The obvious flaw in their plan was the difference between paralysis and a fractured ankle. In other words, Marissa's friend had essentially just beaten her. Yet somehow, they continued with the plan. The sheer absurdity of the lengths Marissa was willing to go to secure insurance money to pay off Alan gave the police a clear motive for the murder of her husband. Given her injuries, Marissa was allowed to recover in the hospital, but as soon as she was able, she was questioned again. The investigators laid out all the evidence before her, and Marissa finally gave in. She offered a third version of events. That night, Dale hadn't attacked her. She had decided to strike her husband on her own. Nevertheless, she insisted it had been in self-defense, claiming she had snapped after enduring years of abuse. According to Marissa, she quietly crept into the bedroom that night and began hitting her sleeping husband with the hammer. She struck him so many times that she couldn't even estimate the total number of blows, but it was clearly a large number. She only stopped when Stan, who had rushed in after hearing the noise, took the hammer from her. Now that Marissa had finally admitted to killing her husband, her only chance at freedom rested on claiming self-defense. She asserted that she had repeatedly been hospitalized due to her husband's abuse, but surely she must have known that this was easily verifiable. All the police had to do was check her medical records. She also claimed that on one occasion, Dale had pushed her so hard that she dislocated her shoulder, and a friend had to put it back in place. Neither her hospital visits nor her friends confirmed Marissa's stories. In fact, every witness interviewed stated that they had never seen any signs of Dale harming his wife. On the contrary, Dale was described as gentle, loving, and patient, while Marissa came across as aggressive. Investigators concluded that Marissa was used to people believing her without question. She had been spinning one lie after another, confident that at least one version would satisfy the police and leave her unchallenged. But the police also uncovered another of her lies. One might wonder how Dale could have failed to notice that his wife was spending far more than he earned. Marissa had told friends and relatives that she had received a large inheritance from her late stepfather. She even claimed that this windfall was thanks to one of her stepfather's former lovers, a man named Alan Flores. Yes, the very same Alan Flores who was her secret lover. Needless to say, her stepfather was very much alive, had no preference for men, and had never left his stepdaughter a single cent. Because Alan knew so much about Marissa's real life, the police were eager for him to testify against her. Initially, he refused, still having feelings for her. However, his stance changed when officers searched his home and discovered numerous explicit videos and images on his computer. Most involved consenting adults, but one file contained images of minors. The police acknowledged that Alan may not have even been aware of the file and might never have viewed it, but its mere presence gave investigators and the prosecution leverage. They offered him a deal: testify against Marissa and in return, receive full immunity from any charges. Moreover, at trial, he would be portrayed as a victim of Marissa rather than as another offender. In other words, they cast him as the innocent lamb, because a far more dangerous predator was in the courtroom. With little choice, Alan agreed to cooperate. On November 27, 2009, Marissa was formally charged with first-degree murder. Prosecutors announced that they would be seeking the death penalty. Marissa and her attorneys attempted to negotiate a plea deal with the prosecution, but their efforts failed. 5 years later, her trial finally began. The judge demanded that none of the jurors have prior knowledge of the Jodi Arias case, a challenging requirement given how high-profile that case had been and how strikingly similar it was to Marissa's. Jodi Arias had been tried just a year earlier in the same courthouse. The resemblance between the two women was notable. Both were attractive brunettes with long hair, typically straightened to mid-back length, and wore glasses, though not consistently. In both cases, another man was present in the women's lives at the time they killed their alleged one and only. Jodi Arias had been accused of attacking her boyfriend, Travis Victor Alexander, while he was in the shower delivering both stab and gun wounds that led to his death. She claimed self-defense, asserting that he had been abusive toward her. Because the Arias trial had become something of a media circus, the court took extraordinary precautions to prevent a repeat during Marissa's trial, resulting in meticulous jury preparation and selection. The prosecution's key witness was Alan Flores, who described how he had lent Marissa a large sum of money, believing she was in genuine need as a single mother. Alan explained that he knew about Dale and had even visited the couple's home several times, but he assumed they were divorced and that Marissa, out of kindness, allowed her ex-husband to live with her during his difficult times. Naturally, under those circumstances, Dale was unable to provide financial support to his ex-wife and children. After 2 years of this arrangement, Alan, sensing something was amiss, demanded repayment. This sent Marissa into a panic and set her deadly plan in motion. Initially, she tried to blackmail Alan into killing Dale for her. When he refused, she decided to hire someone else. But since she had no money of her own, she had Alan provide $7,000 for a hitman. Although Marissa wasn't targeting Alan, he soon realized the danger she posed and, shortly before Dale's murder, began keeping a sort of diary, recording all conversations with his lover. These recordings revealed that Marissa told Alan she would either hire someone to kill her husband or do it herself, and then claimed to the police that he had assaulted her after they drank one evening. A day before the murder, she even claimed to Alan that she had already killed Dale with a crowbar after he attacked her. A lie, but likely a rehearsal for the actual crime. Sitting on the witness stand, Allen testified that despite everything, he had continued his relationship with Marissa, admitting to prosecutors that he suspected Marissa was just using him for money. Another unexpected witness took the stand, Marissa's former boyfriend, Travis Tatro, who had worked as a bouncer at the club where Marissa once danced. Travis testified that Marissa had approached him asking him to deal with her husband. He was horrified, not only because she was essentially asking him to commit a crime, but also because she had previously told him that Dale had already died, allegedly from stomach cancer several years earlier. Once he realized how incredible a liar she was, Travis decided he wanted nothing further to do with her. Before that, he had always believed her when she complained about her husband's abuse. A psychologist also testified, Dr. Janine DeMart, who had examined Jodi Arias the previous year. Dr. DeMart concluded that Marissa suffered from dissociative personality disorder. In simpler terms, she was a sociopath. She also showed signs of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Marissa claimed this stemmed from being beaten by her mother and sexually abused by her stepfather during childhood. She also asked her mother and stepfather to take care of her 3 daughters. Dr. DeMart questioned what kind of mother would entrust her children to others if her story were true. The defense, meanwhile, maintained that Marissa had snapped after enduring years of life with an abusive husband. They argued that she had been forced to kill the tyrant to protect herself from further beatings. Even Marissa's now 18-year-old daughter, Rhiannon, took the stand. She testified that Dale had indeed hurt her mother and described the household as tense, though she admitted that her father deeply loved her mother and likely would have forgiven her for what she had done. Nonetheless, the young woman had already lost the man who had raised her as a father, and it was clear she did not want to lose her mother as well. The trial concluded in early April 2014. The jury deliberated for nearly a week before reaching a verdict. On April 8th, Marissa DeVault was found guilty of first-degree murder. Marissa's daughters wrote a letter to the court pleading that their only remaining parent not be taken from them. While they acknowledged the brutality of their mother's actions and the devastating loss of their father, they asked for mercy. The judge believed the daughters had been skillfully manipulated by their mother, but the jury still reviewed the letter. One juror later admitted that, without it, they would likely have voted for the death penalty, which was still legal in Arizona. On April 22nd, Marissa was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She offered an apology, expressing sympathy for Dale's parents and their loss, but her words did little to earn goodwill. As psychologist Dr. Janine DeMart noted, Marissa laughed when discussing Dale's murder over the phone while in prison. She showed no genuine remorse for killing him, nor any real sympathy for his loved ones. Even Marissa's friend observed that she had deliberately isolated Dale from his family, making him easier to manipulate, a fact reflected in the scarcity of adult photographs of him with his relatives. Furthermore, when his family requested Dale's ashes, Marissa reportedly said she would only release them if they dropped their lawsuit against her, demonstrating her continued manipulative behavior and lack of remorse. Marissa's appeal was denied. She is currently serving her sentence in Arizona in the same prison as Jodi Arias, and reportedly the 2 women have become friends. Why not? Of course, there are significant differences in their cases. Jodi could not be with the man she wanted, while Dale was completely devoted to Marissa, yet she wanted his money. Still, despite their different motives, both women share a striking ability to manipulate those around them. It's hard not to wonder, what kind of friendship can exist between 2 women with such talents for manipulation? Kathy entered the prison building alone. No one accompanied her or told her how to behave. A fragile, pretty woman, she sat quietly waiting, watching as they brought him to her. The man who had once tried to lure her into a trap. The man she believed to be a repeat murderer. A dangerous, incurable psychopath obsessed with sex and control. She forced herself to smile politely, shook his hand, and leaned in to kiss his cheek. Her fingers brushed against his clean-shaven hand. One can only guess what it cost her, how much inner strain it took. But even now she couldn't leave. She had to ask him the question that had been tormenting her. She would not go without answers. Otherwise, she would never forgive herself for not trying. On Saturday, February 15, 2003, 21-year-old Christy Johnson called her mother, Terry Hall, just for a casual chat as she usually did. Christy told her mother she was going to the Century City Mall in Los Angeles, and Terry suggested she buy herself a belated Valentine's Day gift. Christy was supposed to call again on Sunday, but she didn't, nor did she call on Monday. Her mother tried to reach her, but Christy's cell phone went unanswered, and her co-workers were puzzled as to why she hadn't shown up for work. Terry knew her daughter would never miss work. Christy dreamed of becoming part of the film industry, wanted to work as a makeup artist, and was well on her way to making that dream come true. She wouldn't have just walked away from it all. Terry contacted the police and also informed her ex-husband, Kirk Johnson, that their daughter was missing. Both parents flew to Los Angeles to be near the place where Christy had disappeared, to hand out flyers and to take part in the search. They feared that someone Christy knew might have hurt her. She had recently broken up with her boyfriend and had even gone to the police to report domestic abuse. Detective Virginia Obenchain, who took charge of the missing person investigation, spoke with the young man. He admitted to the abuse, explaining that it had happened only once, that he was deeply ashamed, that he loved Christy very much, and that they had already reconciled. He had nothing whatsoever to do with her disappearance, and, in fact, had been out of town when she vanished. His alibi checked out. Ruling out that lead, Detective Obenchain interviewed Christy's roommate in Santa Monica, who confirmed that Christy had indeed gone to the Century City Mall. She came back in high spirits, saying she'd been invited to audition for a role in a James Bond movie. Allegedly, they were looking for new faces, and Christy, tall, blonde, and beautiful, seemed like a perfect fit. Christy told her roommate where the audition would be held, but the roommate couldn't recall the address. Police went to the mall and reviewed surveillance footage to see if Christy appeared on camera, and she did. But although they checked every camera, they couldn't spot any man accompanying her. Christy had told her roommate that the meeting with the supposed film industry representative was scheduled for 5:30 p.m. But where exactly? Fortunately, by 2003, technology had advanced enough for investigators to determine that Christy's last phone activity was at 5:35 p.m. from the mountain area of Laurel Canyon in the Hollywood Hills. A local woman confirmed that a girl matching Christy's description had driven up in a white Miata and asked for directions to one of the houses on the hill. After that, all trace of Christy was lost. The police turned to the media for help, sharing Christy's photo and information about her meeting with a mysterious man at the shopping mall. A newspaper article about the case caught the eye of Susan Murphy, and she immediately felt a sense of déjà vu. Susan called the police and was connected with Detective Virginia Obenchain. She explained that just a few days before Christy's disappearance, she herself had been approached by a man at the very same mall. He introduced himself as Victor Thomas, claiming to be a cinematographer. According to him, there was a casting call underway for a new James Bond movie. Victor told Susan that with her looks, she would be perfect for the role, and he gave her an address in West Hollywood where the audition was supposedly taking place. At first, Susan assumed he was simply trying to flirt with her, but a small part of her hoped the offer might actually be real. She decided to go, but not alone. Her boyfriend came with her. When Susan met Victor, he suggested they go have a coffee and discuss the details. As he spoke, he gestured toward an abandoned building nearby. Susan refused to go anywhere with him until he showed her some credentials. He claimed he had left them on set. At that moment, Susan signaled to her boyfriend, and Victor realized she wasn't alone. He immediately changed his tone, told her she was definitely not right for the part, and walked away. Susan and her boyfriend tried to follow the man, but he managed to escape. Police checked the name Victor Thomas and reviewed surveillance footage from the mall. Predictably, no one by that name matched his description, but the cameras did show that a man had followed Susan around the mall for some time before finally approaching her. Unfortunately, his face was too obscured to be identified. However, what Susan told detectives next completely turned the investigation upside down. She said that the supposed cinematographer had asked her to wear a very specific outfit to the audition: a man's white dress shirt, a black miniskirt, pantyhose, and black high heels. The higher, the better. The outfit was also supposed to include a tie, which, according to Victor, she would be given on site. Those words changed everything. On the day she disappeared, Christy Johnson had purchased that exact list of clothing items at the mall. Her roommate also confirmed that Christy had been told to come to the audition dressed in a particular way. This detail had never been released to the media, which meant Susan could only have known it if she had spoken directly to the same man who lured Christy away. Thanks to Susan, the police were finally able to produce a composite sketch of the suspect and release it to the public. Actress Kathy DeBono happened to be watching television when the morning news showed the composite sketch. The moment she saw it, she confidently picked up the phone and called the police to tell them her story. It had happened a few years earlier when Kathy was 29, tall, slender, and strikingly beautiful. She had already appeared in several TV shows, Chicago Hope and Star Trek Deep Space Nine. One day, while walking through the Century City Mall, she was approached by a well-dressed man. He politely asked whether she was an actress. When Kathy said yes, he invited her to audition for a role in a James Bond movie. The man introduced himself as Brian and claimed to work for Disney. He complimented Kathy, was very courteous, and looked every bit the successful professional. He asked her to wear the same provocative outfit that police had already heard about from other witnesses. But what he didn't anticipate was that, as an actress, Kathy was well acquainted with how legitimate auditions actually worked, and they always went through her agent. She grew suspicious when Brian insisted on keeping her agent out of it, and even more so when he offered an absurdly large sum of money for the role. Brian answered her probing questions smoothly, maintaining a confident demeanor. But Kathy already understood what kind of person she was dealing with. She decided to keep talking to him, only to expose his deceit. Eventually, she agreed to go to the address he gave her, but not right away. Her agent called Brian's supposed office at Disney, and they confirmed that no one by that name had been at the mall that day, and that Disney was not producing any James Bond film. When Kathy finally went to the address Brian had provided, she brought a friend, a professional stuntman, along for safety. They drove to the location, but Brian never showed up. Kathy believes he spotted her companion and decided to disappear. Having failed to uncover his true identity, she could only hope that no other woman would fall for Brian's lies. But of course, those hopes were not meant to come true. Just hours before Christy disappeared, only a few hours after Victor fled from Susan Murphy and her boyfriend, a man sat down at a restaurant table in the Century City Mall. The table belonged to Alice Walker. Alice was an actress, dancer, and writer. At the time, however, she had only recently moved to Los Angeles and was working as a waitress while trying to break into the film industry. The man who joined her introduced himself as Victor and claimed he was also a writer. He said he had written a book about a man who was framed for filming real-life murders, movies that supposedly depicted actual killings. As one might guess, the conversation soon turned into an invitation. Victor told the attractive young woman that she would be perfect for an audition for a James Bond movie. Alice suspected nothing. She put on high heels, a blouse, a skirt, and pantyhose, just as he'd asked, and went to a building in West Hollywood, the same place where Susan Murphy had been invited. Victor told her that the film's director would be present at the audition, but when Alice arrived, there was no director. Still, Victor suggested that she go through a few movements. She agreed. He had her walk in a circle a few times, then sit down with her legs crossed so that her ankles were pressed tightly together. It felt odd, unsettling even, but not yet frightening. Victor then told her to return another day, when the director would supposedly be there. At their next meeting, there was still no director, and Victor's behavior had become increasingly disturbing. He asked her to try on a tie he had brought with him. Victor placed the tie around Alice's neck, but as he began to tighten it, she slipped her thumb between the fabric and her throat, preventing him from pulling it too tight. That ended their second meeting. Victor told her they would try again in a day or two. On February 15th, the very day Christy Johnson vanished, Victor called Alice. She didn't answer, and he left a message, his voice oddly agitated, saying he was trying to reach her. Was it possible that, unable to reach Alice, the predator turned to Christy instead? The thought haunted her. She realized that she had survived purely by chance, despite having been alone with the probable kidnapper not once but twice. So who was this man? Victor or Brian? Or perhaps neither? Detectives were confident that sooner or later someone would recognize the man in the composite sketch, and they were right. Detective Obenchain received a call from a parole officer who said the sketch looked strikingly similar to one of her former parolees, Victor Paleologus. Paleologus had served time for sexual assault and had been released less than a month before Christy Johnson's disappearance. Since his release, he had failed to report to the authorities even once. Victor was 40 years old. He had grown up in the suburbs of Philadelphia and moved to Los Angeles in his early 20s. He was divorced and had once owned 3 restaurants, all of which had gone bankrupt. One of them, as it turned out, was located in the very same building where he had lured Susan Murphy and Alice Walker for their supposed auditions. His criminal record was extensive: theft, identity fraud, scams. But what truly drew the detectives' attention were Victor Paleologus's crimes against women. In 1989, Victor met a stunning 21-year-old woman named Christine Kludgen. Introducing himself as John Marino, he claimed to work in the music industry. Victor could be quite charming when he wanted to be, and when he invited Christine to dinner, she agreed. John promised to pick her up in a limousine, They would have dinner, he said, and then head to a hotel for an exclusive party, one where celebrities like Madonna were expected to appear. Dinner went smoothly, and afterward they drove to the hotel. But as soon as they reached the designated floor, Christine felt uneasy. What kind of party had no music, no voices, no security guards at the entrance? And why did her companion have a key card to the room? Before she could fully process the situation, they were inside, and the man suddenly tried to kiss her. Christine pushed him away, but he grabbed her, threw her onto the bed, and began tearing at her clothes. Then she saw something chilling, ropes tied to the headboard. He had come prepared. Christine fought desperately. Fortunately, she knew a few self-defense techniques and wasn't afraid to use them. The struggle went on for over an hour. Victor alternated between begging for forgiveness, claiming stress had driven him to act that way, and lunging at her again. At one point, he tried to strangle her with his bare hands. Christine managed to twist free and bit him as hard as she could in the groin. He was still fully clothed, but the pain was enough. He rolled off the bed, screaming in agony. Christine shouted for help. The attacker grabbed his jacket and bolted out of the room, cursing as he fled. When help arrived, Christine was covered in bruises and abrasions. Victor was soon arrested and charged with assault, attempted sexual assault, and false imprisonment. But then came the shocking part. During the trial, the jury decided that Victor didn't look like a rapist. Christine was outraged. What, she wondered bitterly, was a rapist supposed to look like? In the end, the jury couldn't reach a unanimous verdict on most of the charges, except for one, false imprisonment. Victor pleaded guilty to that count and was given probation. He had gotten off almost scot-free. His confidence soared, and of course, he had no intention of stopping. So when, 2 years later, he met actress Elizabeth Buzzini, Victor followed his usual pattern, claiming once again that he worked for Disney. He took Elizabeth to a bar so they could talk. Everything seemed normal at first, until she noticed a strange white powder that had somehow appeared in her drink. Elizabeth kept her composure. Calmly, she excused herself, saying she was going to the restroom, and discreetly asked the manager to call the police. Then she returned to the table and tried to keep Victor there until officers arrived. She asked him directly what the white powder in her glass was. Victor replied that it was just sugar. Elizabeth smiled and suggested they switch drinks, saying she didn't like sugar in hers. Victor gave her a strange look, muttered that he'd be right back, and, of course, ran away. The police took Elizabeth's statement and collected the drink as evidence, but no charges were ever filed against Victor. Then in 1996, another woman he had briefly dated accused him of breaking into her home and chasing her while trying to strangle her. To avoid arrest, Victor barricaded himself inside his trailer. When officers finally got to him, he refused to walk, so they carried him to the patrol car. He was charged with multiple offenses, but once again struck a plea deal, admitting guilt only to robbery. The result? Another probation sentence. 2 years later, Victor Paleologos struck again. This time, he lured a young woman named Heather Mayer to one of his empty restaurants, once more under the familiar pretense of a casting opportunity. Once inside, Victor tied her ankles together, climbed on top of her, and began strangling her. Somehow, Heather managed to break free and escape, a narrow miracle that likely saved her life. For this brutal attack, Victor served less than 4 years in prison after reaching yet another plea deal with prosecutors. In exchange for dropping the charges of attempted sexual assault and false imprisonment, he pleaded guilty only to assault. After 3 years and 5 months, on January 20th, 2003, the predator was released, free to walk once again among unsuspecting people. And ravenous as ever, he wasted no time returning to his old ways. Just 4 days after his release, he approached Susan Murphy at the Century City Mall. Soon after, he targeted Alice Walker. And then only 26 days after leaving prison, Christy Johnson vanished. Surprisingly, finding Victor Paleologos turned out to be far easier than anyone expected. As it happened, he was already in jail. The Beverly Hills police had arrested him for auto theft. Victor had gone on a test drive with a car dealership employee. When they returned to the showroom, he announced that he wanted to buy the car. They discussed the details for a bit, and then at some point, Victor quietly pocketed the keys and drove off in the brand new vehicle, heading straight toward the mall. Clearly, when he'd said he was taking the car, he had meant it literally. The unlucky car thief was caught within an hour. When detectives investigating Christy Johnson's disappearance questioned him, Victor calmly insisted that he had never met her and had only seen her photo on the news. He was composed, confident, and claimed to have an alibi for the night of February 15th, saying that late that Saturday evening, he'd had dinner at a restaurant with a friend. The friend confirmed the dinner took place, but that did little to help Victor's case. After all, Christie had last been seen around 5:30 p.m., while Victor's dinner occurred much later. There was more than enough time for him to have abducted Christie and hidden her somewhere before calmly meeting his friend. Meanwhile, in the parking lot of the St. Regis Hotel, near the mall where Christie had been shopping, her car, a Miata, was found. Christie's father, Kirk, feared that the police might discover his daughter inside the trunk, or at the very least traces of blood. But the car was spotless, meticulously cleaned. Apart from Christie's own fingerprint on the steering wheel, forensic experts found nothing. Inside the car lay her switched-off cell phone. However, a parking attendant reported seeing a man drive the car there. He had appeared just before dawn on the morning after Christie's disappearance. The man exited the vehicle and walked away. The attendant tried to stop him, insisting that the car needed to be properly parked, but the man ignored him completely. Detective Obenchain organized a lineup for identification, inviting Susan Murphy, her boyfriend, and the parking attendant. Susan and her boyfriend immediately identified Victor Paleologos. The parking attendant, however, could not confirm his identity, though he had seen the man for only a few seconds. In any case, the suspect's arrest set off a chain of critical events. A real estate agent contacted the police after recalling unusual behavior from Victor. The agent had been showing him homes in the Hollywood Hills. On one occasion, Victor asked the agent to step into a neighboring room while he closed the door, shouted, and asked if a scream could be heard. Alarmed, the agent decided to report the incident to the authorities. Detective Obenchain received a list of the houses Victor had visited. Some were near the canyon where Christie had made her last phone call. Police obtained search warrants for all the homes, hoping to find evidence or perhaps Christie herself, but nothing was discovered. The next logical step would likely have been to search the hills surrounding the properties, but they didn't get the chance. After several rainy days, a few local residents went for a hike in the hills and came across a body. Officers descended into the canyon and found 21-year-old Christie Johnson. She was identified by a hibiscus flower tattoo on her back. Christie was still wearing the pantyhose and high heels noted in earlier witness reports. Her hands and feet were still bound. The killer had not bothered to untie her. Police informed her parents, and the medical examiner determined the cause of death: strangulation. Additionally, Christie had a skull fracture, indicating she was still alive when she was thrown down the slope. No signs of sexual assault were found. Victor Paleologos was formally charged with first-degree murder. The trial began 3 years after Christie's death on July 13, 2006. One by one, the women who had unfortunately encountered Victor took the stand. Their testimonies were eerily similar, describing almost exactly the same events: the outfits he asked them to wear, his behavior, and the settings of the auditions. Their statements matched word for word. A far more shocking story could have come from Christine Cludgian, who had fought Victor in the hotel room, but Victor's attorney successfully prevented her from testifying. However, Elizabeth Bozzini, who had narrowly avoided drinking the spiked beverage Victor had prepared, did testify. Interestingly, the Santa Monica police had kept that drink for over 10 years. When it was finally tested in a lab, it was found to contain a powerful drug capable of completely clouding a person's mind, clearly intended for nefarious purposes. The defense argued that the prosecution had no physical evidence, and technically, they were correct. The only eyewitness in the case was the parking attendant, and he did not identify Victor Paleologos as Christie's killer. The trial lasted 2 weeks, with the prosecution calling around 40 witnesses. When suddenly Victor's attorney approached the court, the defendant decided he was willing to accept a plea deal. As had happened many times before, the prosecution agreed, fully aware that they had no physical evidence. They knew that if even one juror doubted Victor's guilt, they would be forced to retry the case. Victor refused to explain what he had done to Christie, agreeing only to take responsibility for her death. It was not a full confession, but he would agree to no more. The prosecution, the judge, and Christie's family accepted this. The jury was dismissed. Everything seemed settled. Then Victor changed his mind again. He wrote a long letter to the court, accusing his attorney of pressuring him into the plea deal, claiming he was actually innocent. His attorney denied the accusation, of course. Victor insisted that the trial continue, though it was unclear what he hoped to achieve. Did he think he could convince a jury of his innocence, as he had tried before? Or was he aiming for a better plea deal? Fortunately, the law does not bend to such games. The judge explained to Victor that a plea deal cannot be voided simply because he changed his mind. Victor was ultimately sentenced to 25 years to life, with the possibility of parole, an excellent outcome for the prosecution, given that he could have faced the death penalty or life imprisonment without the possibility of release. Christie's family agreed to the plea deal because the prosecutor confidently assured them that even with the possibility of parole, Victor would never be released given a first-degree murder conviction. However, the prosecutor could not have foreseen changes in California law. In 2022, the state decided that prisoners over 50 years old who had served more than 20 years could be eligible for a parole hearing. Research supports the reasoning. Elderly individuals are far less likely to commit crimes after release. But frankly, there is an even more practical motivation: overcrowded prisons and the enormous cost of incarceration. Billions of dollars are spent maintaining people behind bars, 96% of whom would not commit even minor offenses upon release. Yet Christie's mother, Terry, strongly disagrees. She is convinced that Victor would still have the strength and will to attack a vulnerable young woman, even after turning 60. And she is not alone. Many share her fear of his potential release. Kathy DeBuono agreed with her. Having studied psychology, and after her encounter with Victor, she delved into criminal psychopathy. In her view, Victor is a psychopath, meaning he will never change at any age. Determined to raise awareness, Kathy decided to make a documentary, telling as many people as possible about his crimes. She even wrote to Victor in prison, asking if he would be interested in participating in her project. He refused to appear in her film. Nevertheless, a correspondence began between them, lasting several years. His first letters were very polite, but at some point his true nature surfaced. He sent her a letter in which sexual fantasies were intertwined with violence, revealing the dangerous mindset beneath his courteous facade. Believing that Victor was a psychopath, Kathy decided to dig into his past, knowing that such tendencies often emerge early in life. Among unsolved cases, she found one involving an unidentified woman murdered in 2014 in Bensalem, Pennsylvania, while Victor had been attending his brother's wedding there. Kathy became suspicious because when the woman was found, a second set of clothing was nearby: a blouse, stockings, and high heels, eerily similar to the outfits Victor had asked previous victims to wear. Most importantly, the victim had been pregnant. The detective investigating her murder had always suspected the child's father might be involved. Kathy contacted the detective, and together they considered that Victor could be the father. They needed DNA evidence, but California police and prosecutors would not release Victor's DNA based on mere suspicion. So Kathy decided to obtain it herself. She visited Victor in prison, placing a bandage on her finger so she could shake his hand and collect his DNA. But the opportunity turned out even better. Victor had shaved his hands, allowing Kathy to brush her fingers over his hand, pretending to admire the smooth skin. He even kissed her on the cheek upon greeting her. Of course, Kathy couldn't simply leave immediately. She seized the moment to ask Victor about Christie. He asked her to keep his words secret and then recounted his version of events. He met Christie at the mall, lured her to a house in the Hollywood Hills, gave her drugs, engaged in sexual activity, and then proposed erotic asphyxiation, to which she supposedly consented. Kathy feigned belief. Victor continued, claiming he had gone too far. When he was unable to revive Christie, he panicked, wrapped her body in a sleeping bag, rolled it down the slope, and fled. He thought he had convinced Kathy, but she already knew that on the day he dumped Christie's body, he had called the real estate agent again, scouting empty homes and isolated roads in the Hollywood Hills, planning another victim. Another young woman had been lucky to avoid him because he was caught in time. Unfortunately, Victor's DNA did not match the child of the unknown Bensalem victim. Still, Kathy and the detective believe Victor may have killed her or other women whose deaths have not yet been linked to him. Regardless, he admitted to Christie's murder, which strengthens their case to prevent his early release. This is especially urgent because Victor's parole hearing was scheduled for 2023, 5 years earlier than stipulated in his sentence. Neither Christie's family nor other victims were informed. Kathy was shocked upon discovering this, and the women collectively raised public attention. Likely because of this, Victor postponed the hearing. Even so, the hearing will happen too soon. The decision on Victor Paleologos' parole is now set for November 2025. If he is released, there is every reason to believe he will return to his old ways. Given the continued popularity of James Bond films, he would need no new ruse to lure young women to Los Angeles, chasing their dreams of an acting career. In the mid-20th century, Australian journalist and reporter Rupert Murdoch became the head of his own media company. He bought several newspapers in Australia and New Zealand, and then decided to expand his business. In 1969, he acquired two popular British newspapers, The Sun and News of the World. The position of deputy chairman of the company was given to 60-year-old Alec Mackay, a man with 10 years of experience in the industry. Alec lived with his wife Muriel in Wimbledon, a fashionable suburb of London near the famous tennis club. On December 19, 1969, Rupert Murdoch and his wife Anna traveled to Australia for Christmas. During Rupert's absence, Alec Mackay took over his responsibilities. As acting company head, Alec also had the privilege of using a Rolls-Royce and chauffeur services. So on the morning of Monday, December 29th, a Rolls-Royce picked him up and drove him to work, where he remained throughout the day. That same day, 55-year-old Muriel Mackay, dressed in a green wool suit, a black and white checkered coat, and cream-colored shoes, went out shopping. She returned home around 5 p.m. Alec arrived home after work at 7:45 p.m. As he approached the house, he noticed scraps of the previous day's newspaper scattered on the ground. He rang the doorbell, 3 short rings and 1 long. It was the secret code he and Muriel had devised. They had taken this precaution after a burglary in September, when thieves had broken into their home and stolen Muriel's jewelry. Along with her valuables, Muriel had lost her sense of security in her own house. Since then, she also locked the door with a chain. Yet even with that, she would never open the door unless she was certain it was Alec. When Muriel didn't answer, Alec rang again 3 times, thinking she might be upstairs. Still no reply. He turned the handle and, to his surprise, found the door unlocked. Entering the house, he saw all the lights on, but no sign of his wife. At once he noticed that a large chair had been moved away from the wall and placed in the center of the hallway. Muriel's handbag lay on the floor, its contents scattered everywhere along with more torn newspaper. On the table, Alex saw a piece of tape and a thick length of twine. The telephone had been ripped from the wall and lay overturned on the floor. At first, Alec thought burglars had once again broken in, but when he found the family's beloved dog lying in the living room in front of the open fireplace, his concern deepened. Muriel worried constantly about the dog's safety and would never have left a fire burning without the protective screen if she had gone out. Moving further inside, Alec noticed the television still on, Muriel's outdoor shoes sitting on the stairs, and her car still parked in the garage. Terrified that an intruder might still be inside and that his wife was hiding, he rushed upstairs, calling her name and checking every room. Then he searched the garage and garden. Without success, Muriel had vanished. Alec hurried to the neighbors to use their phone and report everything to the police. Officers arrived within 10 minutes and immediately noticed signs that someone had used force to push the door and to gain entry. Items found inside the house, such as the twine and tape, which did not belong to the family, painted a grim picture of what had happened. Also missing were Muriel's remaining jewelry from the previous burglary and her coat. While officers with dogs searched the grounds around the home, Alec contacted his adult children, Ian, Diane, and Jennifer. Desperate to draw as much attention as possible to his wife's disappearance, Alec reached out to the editor of The Sun, asking the paper to publish a story about Muriel's vanishing. The sensational article was rushed into print with a striking headline, but Alec's decision angered the police, who were still uncertain about how to treat the case and were not convinced a kidnapping had taken place. In the mid-20th century, it wasn't unheard of for a housewife to suddenly run away, sometimes leaving with a new lover. There was also the possibility of temporary memory loss in a 55-year-old woman. Detectives interviewed Alec and his children to determine whether Muriel's disappearance could have been a voluntary escape. They all insisted that she had always supported her husband and never opposed their move from Australia to Britain. She adored her home and garden, and she loved to spend her free time painting, showing remarkable talent. Alec told police that his wife had behaved completely normally that morning. She had even prepared dinner, clearly expecting him home. The family was convinced it was an abduction. Still, none of them could imagine a reason why anyone would target Muriel. They speculated it might have been an attempt to take revenge on Alec for something published in the newspapers. 5 hours had passed since Muriel's disappearance became known. The telephone line was reconnected, and at 1:15 a.m. it rang. Alec's son-in-law David answered. A male voice on the other end said,
"This is Group M3, the Mafia. We are from America. We have your wife. We tried to grab Rupert Murdoch's wife. We couldn't take her, so we took yours instead. By Wednesday, you must raise £1 million.
Shocked and confused, Alec tried to protest that he had no such enormous sum, but the stranger cut him off, saying it was not his concern. The operator later informed police that the call had been placed from a phone booth in Epping, about 50 kilometers northeast of Wimbledon. However, as long as the stranger's claims remained unverified, the police continued to treat the case as a disappearance rather than a confirmed abduction. They feared the caller might simply have learned about the case from the newspapers. While abduction was not ruled out, it was considered highly unlikely. Kidnapping for ransom was virtually unheard of in Britain. Rumors even spread suggesting the whole thing might have been a publicity stunt by the media magnate himself, designed to draw more attention to his newspapers. While tabloids speculated, investigators focused on the facts. They knew they had to solve the crime before inevitable copycats emerged. On December 31st, a letter arrived at the McKay family's home address. Inside the envelope was a sheet of cheap blue paper. The handwriting belonged to Muriel McKay, and it was obvious that she had written it while blindfolded. The letter confirmed that Group M3 had direct contact with the missing woman. In her note, Muriel urged her husband to cooperate with the kidnappers and asked what she could possibly have done to deserve such treatment. The postmark showed that the letter had been mailed from another suburb about 30 kilometers northeast of Wimbledon. Since the initial ransom call had been traced to Epping, investigators believed that the kidnappers, and possibly Muriel herself, were being held somewhere in the northeastern suburbs of London. After receiving the letter, the police were forced to officially declare that they were investigating the case as a kidnapping for ransom. While families around the world celebrated New Year's Eve, the McKay family waited in tense silence for Group M3 to call with instructions on how to deliver the money. Although the police tried to keep the contents of Muriel's letter hidden from the media, the McKay family believed the press could be a powerful tool to pressure the kidnappers. So they revealed everything to journalists. This decision led to an enormous, almost unbelievable flood of calls from imposters hoping to make easy money, as well as cruel pranksters. The kidnapper's voice and his insistence on calling himself M3 allowed the police to filter out some of the fake calls. Informants and undercover agents were instructed to listen carefully for any rumors about the mysterious group calling themselves the M3 Mafia. The police received hundreds of tips, both from informants and from ordinary citizens, including one from a Wimbledon resident who recalled seeing a dark-colored Volvo with two men inside slowly circling the neighborhood at 4:40 p.m. on the day of Muriel's disappearance. Later that same evening, around 6 p.m., another neighbor noticed that the lights were on in the McKay home and a dark-colored car was parked in their driveway. 8 days after the last call from M3, another letter arrived, marked urgent and personal. Written on a sheet torn from a school notebook, M3 complained that they had been unable to reach Alec because the telephone line was always busy. They stated they would provide instructions for the exchange once the police were withdrawn. After 4 days of silence, on January 14th, the kidnappers called again, promising to give what they considered proof that Muriel was still alive, a description of the coat she had been wearing on the day of the abduction. But the family was not convinced that this proved anything at all. The M3 representative then promised that Muriel would write another letter. The next conversation took place 5 days later, on Monday, January 19th. It lasted 45 minutes, the longest call during Muriel's disappearance. Alec demanded proof that Muriel was alive, suggesting she should write the full names of their children or describe the Christmas presents she had recently received. M3 brushed off his request, assuring him that his wife was alive and that he would be allowed to speak with her only after half the ransom had been handed over. On January 22nd, the family received 2 more letters. They were sent from Wood Green, another suburb in northeast London. Both were written by Muriel and addressed to Alec and Diane. Again, she pleaded with her husband to cooperate, while in the letter to her daughter, she urged her to persuade Alec not to work with the police, mentioning she had seen Diane on a news program. This comment immediately raised suspicion. Diane had only spoken once to journalists, on the day after her mother's disappearance. It seemed strange that Muriel would mention it 23 days later. Detectives began to suspect that Muriel had been forced to write all the letters long ago and that they were being mailed out gradually to create the illusion she was still alive. Along with the letters came the first detailed ransom instructions, setting the exchange date for February 1st. £500,000 was to be placed in a suitcase and transported in Muriel's car along the North Circular Road to a phone booth on Cambridge Road. At exactly 10 p.m., M3 would call that phone box with further directions. During the next conversation with M3, Ian told them they had gathered 250,000 pounds, but insisted they needed proof that Muriel was alive, saying he wanted to speak with her. Once again, the kidnappers refused. In desperation, Ian suggested they buy an evening newspaper and have Muriel copy out the headlines. 3 days later, another letter arrived from Wood Green. Inside were handwritten notes from Muriel, but none contained newspaper headlines. Instead, they almost repeated the previous letters. The envelope also contained 3 small squares of fabric, cut from the clothing Muriel had been wearing on the day of her disappearance, trimmed so precisely it seemed the work of a skilled tailor. 2 days before the scheduled ransom drop, Ian discussed the final details with the kidnappers. They appeared resigned to the fact they would not receive the full £1 million and agreed to settle for half. Ian offered to use the Rolls-Royce with a chauffeur, explaining he could not drive due to a hand injury. M3 accepted, unaware that Ian's story was a lie. In fact, the police had devised a plan. 2 undercover officers would pose as Ian and the chauffeur, with a hidden radio inside the car. At 9 p.m., the Rolls-Royce left the McKay home, carrying a suitcase filled with £500,000, mostly fake banknotes with only a thin layer of real currency on top. Inside was also a tracking device. The car stopped at the phone booth. Exactly at 10 p.m., the phone rang. M3 directed the man to another phone booth, a 40-minute drive away, where he found a discarded cigarette packet containing instructions. The suitcase was to be delivered to a corner of Cambridge Road. 2 paper flowers would be sticking up from the pavement, marking the spot where the case should be left. The officer followed the instructions and returned to the phone booth, where M3 promised to call back with Muriel's location. More than 100 police officers were secretly watching the suitcase, with 40 in bulletproof vests. If Muriel and her captor appeared, they were prepared to throw her to the ground and shield her while the rest of the team arrested the kidnapper. 3 officers noticed a dark blue Volvo with 2 men inside, circling the area. No one noted the license plate, assuming it was just one of the many police vehicles on the perimeter. Hours passed, but no one came for the suitcase, and at 3:30 a.m., the operation was called off. 2 days later, an M3 representative phoned again, telling Ian the police presence had been far too obvious. The kidnapper said he now had to meet with mafia bosses to decide Muriel's fate, yet only 2 hours later, he called back, apparently calmer. M3 were willing to attempt another exchange, but this time the money must be delivered by Alec and Diane. They no longer trusted Ian, whom they suspected of arranging the police presence. The ransom was to be split into 2 suitcases. On February 6th at 4 p.m., Alec and Diane were to drive the Rolls-Royce to a phone booth and wait for instructions. Again, 2 disguised undercover officers, a man and a woman, took their places in the car. After a series of phone booth visits, they were directed by train to Epping, and from there by taxi to Bishop's Stortford, 40 kilometers northeast of central London. The suitcases were to be left beside a minivan parked near a specific garage. 5 minutes after the drop, the undercover officers noticed a Volvo with a broken rear light slowly passing the minivan. The driver stared fixedly at the suitcases before driving off. Over the next few hours, until 10:47 p.m., the Volvo drove past 3 more times, but the driver never dared stop to pick up the money. At 11 p.m., 2 local residents noticed the abandoned suitcases and, unaware of the secret operation, reported them to the police. To the horror of the undercover team, uninformed local officers simply collected the cases and drove away, abruptly ending the mission. But all was not lost. The police now had a crucial lead. The dark Volvo had been seen at both ransom drop attempts, and a similar car had been spotted by neighbors on the day Muriel was abducted. While this detail had been overlooked the first time, the second sighting allowed officers to record its registration number, XGO 994G. On the morning of February 7th, after 40 days of searching for Muriel, police arrived at a farm in the village of Stocking Pelham, Hertfordshire, about 50 kilometers northeast of London, the area from which M3 had been operating. Parked outside was the dark blue Volvo with a broken headlight. The car was registered to the wife of the farm's owner, 34-year-old Arthur Hossain, an Indian-born immigrant from Trinidad. After moving to London in 1955, Arthur had worked as a tailor until he was drafted in 1960. Unwilling to serve, he deserted and was in prison. During this time, he met a hairdresser 10 years older than him, whom he soon married. Arthur's tailoring business brought in some income, but he wanted more. He took out a loan to buy a farm. In late 1969, his younger brother, 21-year-old Nizamuddin Hossein, moved in to help on the farm while Arthur's wife Elsa and their children visited relatives in Germany. The brothers were very different, both in appearance and temperament. Though the younger appeared stronger, he had a pliant, submissive character, and Arthur easily dominated him. Police quickly identified Nizamuddin as the driver of the Volvo and Arthur as the passenger. Inside the farmhouse, they found a trove of evidence linking the brothers to Muriel. Tape and twine matching those discovered at the McKay residence. 6 paper flowers, a school notebook missing pages used for Muriel's letters, and the same brand of cigarettes as the packet left in the phone booth. Fingerprints on the packet matched Arthur's, while his handwriting corresponded with the ransom notes. The voice of Nizamuddin clearly matched the man who had called as M3. Even more damning, in Nizamuddin's trouser pocket, they found a scrap of paper with the number of the minivan parked by the Bishop's Stortford garage, exactly where the ransom was supposed to be delivered. Another indirect but powerful sign that the police had the right men was the sudden silence. For 40 days, the kidnappers had made 18 phone calls and written 5 letters. After the raid on the farm, not a single word was heard from them again. The Hossein brothers were arrested. By then, detectives were convinced the men were guilty not only of kidnapping, but also of Muriel McKay's death. The next challenge was to find her. For weeks, police searched the farm, but found no trace of the missing woman. The case became a media sensation, with the public questioning how a jury could convict someone of murder without a body. The trial began on September 14, 1970. Both brothers denied involvement and blamed each other. However, the prosecution presented overwhelming evidence against them, enough to prove both were guilty, even if one had been led by the other. In court, it emerged that the brothers had devised their plan in late October 1969 after seeing Rupert Murdoch interviewed on television. They were struck by his mention of the huge financial outlay required for his purchase of the British newspapers, News of the World and The Sun. Fixated on Murdoch's wealth, they concocted a plan to kidnap his young wife Anna, believing he would pay handsomely for her safe return. But their plan was sloppy, and mistakes were inevitable. The Hosseins followed Murdoch's Rolls-Royce, believing that they had located Anna's residence. They had no idea that Murdoch and his wife had flown to Australia for the holidays, and the car was instead being used by Alec McKay. Breaking into the house, they realized their mistake, but decided not to abandon their plan. Instead, they abducted Muriel. On October 6, 1970, after 4 hours of deliberation, the jury found both brothers guilty. They were sentenced to life imprisonment. Arthur later filed appeals and fought for parole, but died in prison in 2009. Unlike his brother, Nizamuddin was released after 20 years and deported to Trinidad, where he vanished from public record. Thus ended the story of loving wife and mother Muriel McKay, torn from the safety of her own home by a cruel mistake and thrust into horror and despair. Johnsonville, South Carolina. On June 24, 2025, the quiet of the small-town evening was shattered by a gunshot. Police officers who arrived just minutes later found 16-year-old Trey Wright on the ground. 2 bullet holes gaped in his chest. Trey was surrounded by other teenagers, screaming and crying. The police assumed the wounded boy was their friend and that they wanted to help. If only they could have guessed. Just a week later, 9 of them would be under arrest, even though only one had pulled the trigger. 9 teenagers would be charged with murder in a case that more closely resembled the product of a deranged imagination. Medics rushed Trey to the hospital, but he died before doctors could save him. The 16-year-old teen's death was a tragedy for his family and friends and a shock to the town, but the real horror was yet to come. Detectives immediately suspected that this was not a random attack or a fight that had gotten out of hand. The question wasn't just who held the gun, but who else knew what was going to happen. And this is where the story takes a sharp turn. Trey's friends, the people he trusted, turned out to be among the betrayers. But the conflict did not arise from some petty grudge. Of course, at the center of it all was a girl. A teenage love triangle escalated into one of the most unprecedented murder investigations in the history of South Carolina. In the summer of 2025, 16-year-old Trey Wright was living in the home of his friend Jasmine Lauterbach and her parents. Jasmine was not his girlfriend. She treated Trey like a younger brother. He was staying with her for a different reason. The fact was, Trey's parents were divorced. His father was not very actively involved in his life. His mother, Ashley Lindsay, had moved to another city. She had remarried and had another child. Naturally, she wanted her son to move with her, but Trey played on the Johnsonville high school football team, and the new school year was about to start in a couple of weeks. So his mother allowed him to stay in town and live with Jasmine's family. Despite the distance separating mother and son, they spoke every day. They had a very warm and close relationship. Trey shared news with his mother, telling her that he was seeing a wonderful girl, 17-year-old Gianna Kistenmaker. And just 2 days before his death, he even admitted to his mother that his relationship with Gianna felt like a dream come true. He truly loved her, and obviously he had no idea what was happening behind his back. Trey was introduced to Gianna by his friend, 19-year-old Devin Rapper. Trey and Devin were not childhood friends. They had met only a few months earlier. But for outgoing guys like them, making new acquaintances was easy. Trey lived in Johnsonville while Devin was from Myrtle Beach. Consequently, Devin knew the best places to go on the beach, where to hang out, and where to watch truck shows, which Trey loved. It was on this common ground that they became friends, and Devin introduced Trey to his girlfriend, Gianna. Trey liked Gianna, but he would never have tried to steal a girl from his friend. However, Devin had a child with another girl, and Trey assumed that he had lost interest in Gianna and would not object if Trey and Gianna started dating. Trey believed he was acting openly, honestly, and correctly, and he was confident that he and Devin were still friends. The young men continued to interact, as confirmed by a photo Trey shared on June 9th, 15 days before his murder. In the photo, Trey is pictured with Devin and another mutual friend, who, 2 weeks later, would watch in horror during Trey's final moments. In the picture, the young people are smiling and appear to be having a great time. In any case, Trey's feelings were reciprocated, and he and Gianna began dating. According to Trey's mother, Ashley, their relationship was somewhat strange. Gianna would visit her son in the evenings and on weekends, and their meetings resembled secret dates. Yet when she was in Myrtle Beach, she was always seen with Devin. If Gianna was playing some kind of games, Trey either did not notice or chose not to. He was happy and often told his mother and friends how lucky he was to have her. However, at some point, Trey and Devin's friendship turned into enmity. The two young men began having arguments on social media. Just a few days before the tragedy, Devin reportedly briefly showed a gun while talking on the phone with Trey. The conflict escalated, fueled by social media posts, and by the day of the murder, both guys understood that a serious confrontation was inevitable. But of course, Trey assumed it would be just a regular fight. Not the best way to resolve a conflict, but far from comparable to murder. Devin also realized the situation was heading toward a fight, but he had no desire to throw punches at Trey. According to some of his friends, he was honestly afraid of Trey, who, though younger, was athletic and a physically strong teenager. Suddenly, Devin realized there was another way to emerge victorious from the situation. On the evening of June 24th, he drove to Jasmine's house where Trey was living in a white Mazda SUV. There were 3 other people in the car, and a girl was driving. When Trey saw the car, he realized the moment for the confrontation had arrived. He confidently approached the vehicle and knocked on the door on Devin's side. According to witnesses, Devin opened the door, but as soon as he did, gunshots rang out, one, then a second. Devin fired twice into Trey's chest from close range, giving him no chance to react or defend himself. After that, the shooter fled the scene. When police arrived at 11:40 p.m., they found Trey lying on the ground, bleeding. His friends, Jasmine and her father, were bent over him. They did not attempt first aid measures such as CPR because Trey had been shot in the chest. All they could do was try to comfort him and urge him to hold on until he could reach the hospital. Unfortunately, Trey died from his injuries at the hospital. His mother was informed that her 16-year-old son had been killed by a friend near the house where he was living. Immediately after the tragedy, the townspeople rallied around the family of the deceased teenager. They began raising funds to support the victim's family. His friends and classmates never imagined they would have to mourn their friend, cheerful, lively Trey Wright, the life of any gathering, who had never before had any conflicts with anyone. It was an indescribable loss for those who knew him. Trey's friend, Karen, expressed her grief over his death. She posted on social media that a fundraiser was being organized to help the family of the fallen teenager. She wrote, "If you can contribute, any help is valuable. Trey was one of my friends. We are heartbroken. To know him was to love him. Rest in peace, Trey." While Trey's family and friends were mourning the untimely death of the young man, the police were doing their job. Literally the next day after the crime, Officers arrested Devin Rapper, which was expected. What no one could have imagined, however, was what would follow. The police arrested Gianna and charged her with complicity in the crime because she had seen the gun with Devin and knew that the conflict between the young men could end, if not in death, at least with Trey being injured. But after hearing witnesses and examining the evidence, the prosecution changed her charge to murder. It turned out that she had been driving the Mazda in which the killer arrived. According to some teenagers, she had been encouraging Trey and Devin to fight. On the day of the murder, she contacted Trey via video call and started an argument, accusing her boyfriend of cheating, even though she knew he'd been spending time with his cousins. At some point during the call, Devin, who was with Gianna, joined the confrontation and even showed that he had a gun. So Gianna knew that Devin was armed and capable of using the weapon, yet she did everything she could to provoke a conflict between the teenagers, even if she expected it to end in just a fight. Her father works in law enforcement, so she should have known better than to play such dangerous games. As Trey's friend Jasmine recalls, after Devin shot his victim, Gianna looked frightened but calmed down rather quickly, and there wasn't even a hint of hysteria in her voice when she called her parents to tell them what had happened. Despite being charged with a serious crime, Gianna was released on bail and placed under house arrest, with one of the restrictions being that she's not allowed to use the internet. The world has gone mad if taking away her internet is considered an adequate response to her role in taking a life. But this was only the first in a series of shocking twists in the case. What happened next, no one could have imagined. The police arrested 7 more teenagers involved in Trey's murder: 17-year-old Sydney Carnes, 18-year-old Hunter Kendall, 17-year-old Braylon Thompson, 17-year-old Jaden Oakler, and 18-year-old Karen Belviso, the same Karen who had claimed to be heartbroken over Trey's death. The names of the other 2 teenagers are not being released due to their age, but investigators stated that all of them were involved in Trey's murder. All 9 defendants were either classmates or members of the cheerleading team, like Karen Belviso, Sydney Carnes, and Gianna Kistemaker. They all knew Trey, he trusted them, and never expected such betrayal when they delivered the killer right to his doorstep. However, like Gianna, almost all the teens were released on bail. Currently, only Devin and Hunter Kendall remain in jail. Devin's case is clear, but the police have not explained why Hunter's bail was denied. The other teens posted bail the same day in the amount of $20,000. Legal experts called the bail amount laughable. $20,000 is nothing in a murder case. Perhaps if the bail had been higher, the teenagers would have taken their arrest and the charges against them more seriously. Because as it was, they had not yet realized the gravity of the situation and continued to act as if nothing terrible had happened. For example, as soon as Braylon Thompson and Jaden Oakler were released from detention, Braylon shared a photo caption, "I'm free," adding a racist slur, which of course I will not quote. After that, the prosecution changed the bail conditions to prohibit the teens from posting anything on social media. Betrayal, crocodile tears, and laughably low bail amounts. Just a week after Trey's death, it already seemed as if justice had been turned upside down. But this case still had more surprises in store. During the investigation, police discovered that this was not the first time Devin had come to the attention of law enforcement. Less than a year before Trey's murder, in August 2024, Devin was arrested on a charge of accomplice to a crime. Moreover, that crime was similar to this case. In 2024, Devin had been in the driver's seat and had driven the killer to his future victim. Devin was arrested and charged with complicity, but there was insufficient evidence against him, so he was released from jail in November, and the charges were dropped in February. In other words, handcuffs were not new to the teen, and the fact that he had once walked away unscathed went to his head. Overall, he was a boy playing at being a gangster. He could not tolerate being ignored and could not accept the idea that he could be replaced. A person with a fragile ego who needed to win every fight. And investigators say that need for control and his inflated ego are what pushed him to load a gun and drive from Myrtle Beach to Johnsonville to kill someone who considered him a friend. And his previous encounters with the police had taught him nothing. During his very first court appearance, when the matter at hand was simply whether he would be released on bail, instead of keeping his mouth shut, Devin decided to speak out. He stated that 4 other people had been with him that night. Although the police already knew this from witnesses, they did not expect to hear such a statement from the defendant. The judge immediately stopped Devin and advised him not to dig his own grave. especially since this court appearance had no impact on the charges against him. But it was too late. The statement had the effect of a bomb exploding. Every media outlet rushed to report that the murder defendant had admitted he was not alone. Whether he spoke foolishly or intentionally mentioned accomplices, such statements could drag all of them down with him. But if Devin intended to shift the blame onto someone else, he underestimated the work of the police. The case against him was not built solely on witness testimony. It was based on evidence that is far harder to refute, evidence that literally shows Trey's murder. Of course, we're talking about video, filmed by the defendants themselves. Incredible as it sounds, they thought they were so untouchable by the law that they decided to record the murder on camera. Police confirmed that at least several of the teenagers recorded Trey's final moments. In particular, the video was filmed by the grieving friend of the victim, Karen Belviso. We know this thanks to a statement from her lawyer who said she could not be charged because she was just recording a video, and the prosecutor should be grateful to Karen for providing the best evidence for the court. The surrealism of this case is off the charts. The prosecutor is supposed to be grateful to one of the accused for filming the murder of a teenager instead of calling the police. Investigators have not released the video to the public, but they confirmed that it clearly shows enough to conclude that this was a premeditated murder. At the very least, it eliminated any chance for Devin to claim that his gun fired accidentally, twice. It's possible that what was seen on the video shocked the prosecutors so much that they turned to a South Carolina law that is almost never applied in murder cases. Its literal wording is one hand, all hands. Typically, it is used for more minor offenses, such as possession of illegal substances or unlawful carrying of a weapon. For example, if a patrol officer stops a car in which illegal substances are found, all passengers and the driver would be charged with possession. By analogy, in August 2025, murder charges were brought against 9 teenagers. Prosecutors claim that all of the defendants knew Devin was armed and planning to use the weapon against Trey, but they did not call the police, nor did they call their parents to ask for advice on what to do. They did nothing to help another teenager, their friend. Some even went with Devin to Trey's house and recorded the murder on video. But that is how the prosecution sees the crime. The teens' lawyers, of course, will argue that their clients had no knowledge of Devin's plans and believe this was just a typical fight between young men over a girl. Even Gianna, who could have been manipulating the teens like puppets, might get away with it. If she did not explicitly message Devin something like, "Take the gun and use it," the prosecution will have to work hard to prove her guilt. Legal experts believe this case could take 2 years or more. 2 years of rumors, plea deals between the defendants and the prosecution, and the video hanging over everyone's heads like the sword of Damocles. But here is another crucial point. If by some miracle Devin is acquitted, the cases against all the others could collapse like a house of cards. The fate of 8 teenagers depends on one young man who cannot even keep his mouth shut. Yet the most important question remains unanswered. How did 9 teenagers get involved in what was essentially a trivial love triangle, and how did it escalate into one of the most unprecedented murder investigations in South Carolina history? What was going on in their minds that they saw nothing terrible in it, neither for the victim nor for themselves? Some would say this is precisely why the one hand, all hands law was applied, so that the South Carolina prosecutor could hold accountable all the teens who treated their own and others' lives with such reckless disregard, as if it were normal. Today, teenagers are learning far too early how to fake loyalty, writing "Rest in peace, Trey" with one hand while loading a gun with the other. Trey is gone forever. 9 more kids could lose their future, and their parents do not know how they raise children who see murder as the only and natural solution to their problems. Stuart Masheter sat in his cozy home in a small village in Cheshire, England, rereading once again the postcard his daughter had sent him from her travels. The postcard had arrived from Thailand, where she had flown after visiting Australia. His 23-year-old daughter, Joanne Masheter, was a passionate traveler, and after graduating from university, her family had given her a journey as a gift, one last adventure before she plunged headlong into climbing the career ladder. She didn't miss the chance to visit the jewel of Asia, Thailand. In her letters, Joanne described her trip, assuring her parents that there was nothing to worry about, that everything was going wonderfully, and that she was very happy. Yet this simple message, a bright postcard meant to bring a smile to her father's face, did not comfort him. On the contrary, the more he read it, the deeper the sadness that settled on his face. For this message was the last thing his daughter sent him before she vanished without a trace. just before Christmas in 1995. She never boarded her flight home on the scheduled day. Clenching his jaw with determination, Stewart made up his mind. He would uncover the truth, even if it meant traveling around the entire world. And whatever that truth turned out to be, he would not return to Cheshire until he knew what had happened to his beloved daughter. Of course, this was only the beginning of a long journey, and at that moment, Stewart could not have imagined that the place where his daughter disappeared was one that no one dared even to think about. On December 30th, 1995, a plane landed at Don Mueang Airport in Bangkok, Thailand. It was almost New Year's Eve, a time of joy and celebration, of happy laughter and genuine smiles. But for 49-year-old Stewart and Jackie Masheter, things were very different. The distraught parents stepping off the plane stood out among the cheerful travelers with their worried faces. They were accompanied by a private detective they had hired to help find their missing daughter, Joe Masheter. Barely setting foot on Thai soil, the three of them hurried straight to the immigration police to file a missing person report. There they were received by Police Colonel Veritep Mathawat, who listened carefully to everything the anxious parents could tell him. The parents described their 23-year-old daughter, Joanne Masheter, as a polite, well-mannered young woman, responsible, punctual, intelligent, and with a habit of keeping a diary, meticulously recording all the important events of her day. She had always been drawn to the idea of traveling. So after successfully completing her law degree at the University of Edinburgh in the United Kingdom, she decided not to take up a job right away. With her parents' blessing, she took a break to explore the world. Joanne's father, Stewart, told the police that he had a friend living in Thailand. When his daughter arrived in Bangkok, that friend met her at the airport. She stayed at his apartment for a short while, but soon left, setting off alone to continue her journey through Thailand. Stewart and Jackie told the police that they had been in regular contact with their daughter. The last time they heard from her was on December 7, 1995. Joanne said she was traveling in the north of the country, in Chiang Mai province. Her voice sounded cheerful, and she assured her family that everything was fine and that she had encountered no problems on the road. After that, there was complete silence. On December 22nd, the day she was supposed to fly back to Britain to spend Christmas with her family, she never showed up at the airport. Tracking her credit card revealed that she hadn't used it at all. However, the police were not without leads. Stewart recalled that his daughter had mentioned her plan to travel south after Chiang Mai to the island of Koh Samui. Acting immediately, Police Colonel Veritep Mathawat assembled an investigative team to search for the missing tourist, and the group set off for the south of the country. And so the police began the year 1996 by spreading out across the island, visiting cafes, restaurants, and beaches, showing tourists and locals a photograph of Joanne and asking if anyone had seen her. But after days of searching, they didn't find a single lead. With no results on Koh Samui, they decided to move on to another popular destination, the island of Koh Phangan. Joanne's family, her parents, who could neither eat nor sleep not knowing where their daughter was, also took part in the search. They handed out flyers, arranged for her photograph to be printed in newspapers, and offered a reward to anyone who might have information about her whereabouts. Their efforts drew widespread attention, the headlines grew louder, and soon the story became national news. Thailand is very sensitive about cases involving the disappearance, robbery, or murder of tourists, as such incidents tarnish the country's image. The press quickly began criticizing the investigation, claiming it was moving too slowly. By that point, a month had already passed since Joanne's last contact, and the chances of finding her alive were fading fast. Even so, the police refused to give up hope and continued their work. And their efforts finally paid off when, on January 6th, they received the first real lead in the case after speaking with a tourist named Alex. Alex had come to Thailand with a friend. On December 3rd, 1995, the two were in Chiang Mai, where they met another traveler, Joanne. The young people quickly became friends and spent some time together visiting local attractions. Eventually, it came time to part ways. But before they did, Alex asked Joanne where she planned to go next. She told him that she was heading to the island of Koh Summit, as she had heard it was very beautiful there. Being a more experienced traveler, Alex advised her to first stop by Khao San Road in Bangkok. The legendary Khao San Road serves as a hub for backpackers planning trips around Thailand and neighboring countries. There, one can easily find affordable accommodation, travel agencies to suit any budget, and even travel companions for further adventures. Joanne replied that she knew about Khao San Road and might indeed take his advice. From this, Police Colonel Verithep Mathawat concluded that she likely had gone there. Armed with this new information, the colonel decided that the search for the missing girl should proceed in three directions. First, in the north, in Chiang Mai, where she had met Alex. Second, on the island of Koh Samet, which she had planned to visit. And third, on Khao San Road in Bangkok. The searches in the first two locations yielded no results, leaving all hope pinned on Khao San Road in the nation's capital. More than 500 people were dispatched to the Phra Nakhon district, where the famous street is located. There they began systematically going from one place to another, visiting shops, businesses, and hotels, questioning people, and showing potential witnesses photographs of Joanne. The police's persistence finally paid off. One of the officers entered one of the many travel agencies on Khao San Road. While talking with a staff member, he noticed a suitcase, and on it, a sticker from Thai Airways flight TG 984 from Sydney to Bangkok. That was Joanne's flight to Thailand. Realizing this, the officer asked the employee whether the suitcase belonged to the girl in the photographs he was carrying and showed her several pictures of Joanne. The woman confirmed that the luggage had indeed been left there by Joanne after she arrived from Chiang Mai and before she set off for the islands of Samui and Samet. According to the employee, Joanne had visited the agency on October 9th, left her suitcase with the staff around 11 a.m., and said she would return later. She mentioned that she planned to take a short trip to Rayong, a province in eastern Thailand, for just 2 days. But almost a month had passed and she had still not come back for her suitcase. It's worth noting that tourists sometimes leave their luggage at travel agencies while vacationing in Thailand. It's not an uncommon practice. Because of that, the police didn't initially see anything suspicious. They quickly seized the suitcase for examination. Inside, they found a roll of undeveloped film. When they developed it, the photographs revealed images of Joanne during her travels, from her stay at a well-known hostel in Australia to her tours through the mountains of Chiang Mai, Chiang Rai, and Mae Hong Son. However, several important items were missing from the recovered luggage. First of all, as Joanne's parents explained, and as confirmed by the family friend she had stayed with in Bangkok, Joanne kept a diary. She didn't write in it occasionally, but every single day, meticulously recording the places she had visited and her impressions of them. That diary was not in the suitcase. In addition, the police found only 2 pairs of shoes, even though she had taken 3 pairs on her trip. Her trekking boots were missing. Her camera was also gone. In other words, the young traveler had left her luggage behind and gone somewhere with her trekking boots, her camera, and her diary, in which she noted her daily adventures. And she had told the travel agency staff she would return for her suitcase in 2 days. What did this suggest to the police? It meant she had likely gone to visit a town or region close enough for a short trip, somewhere she could reasonably travel to and return from within 2 days. At that time, one destination perfectly matched that description, and it remains well known even today: Kanchanaburi. The investigative team searching for Joanne coordinated with their colleagues in Kanchanaburi and dispatched officers to inspect various tourist attractions around the city. And it was in Kanchanaburi that the investigation really began to pick up speed when the police found a key witness, an English teacher named Nari who recognized Joanne. She told the authorities that she had recommended a good guest house for the young traveler to stay at. The police quickly went to that guest house, and the owner confirmed that the missing tourist had checked in on December 9th around 3 p.m. She had left the room the following day at 8 a.m., paid for her stay, and said she was going out to explore the area, promising to return by her scheduled checkout time of 11 a.m. But she never came back. Concerned, the guest house staff entered her room and found Joanne's diary. They kept it safe, hoping she would return for it, but even a month later, she had not. The last entry in the diary, dated December 9th, read, "Today I took the train to Kanchanaburi. I met a very nice fellow traveler who is a teacher. She recommended a guest house where I could stay. But that wasn't all the guest house staff could reveal. They had seen Joanne after leaving the building, cross the street, and enter a bicycle rental shop. At that moment, the police officers realized they were closing in on a crucial clue in the disappearance. Joanne had left the room at 8 a.m. and was supposed to return by 11 a.m. She had taken a bicycle. The officers asked themselves, what site could she possibly visit and return from within that time on a bike? Being a punctual person, she would have planned to return on schedule. That left only 2 possibilities: the Chong Kai War Cemetery and the Cave Buddhist Temple, Wat Tam Khao Pun. The officers split up to investigate both locations. Joanne apparently hadn't visited the cemetery, so everyone headed to the temple Wat Tam Khao Pun. And what did they find at the entrance? A bicycle, parked under a tree. It appeared to have been there for more than a day. The police asked the owner of the bicycle rental shop to inspect it, and he confirmed that it was indeed the bike Joanne had rented. By this point, the entire team, including Joanne's parents, who had also arrived at the temple, felt a surge of hope, realizing that the truth was finally within reach. After confirming that Joanne had arrived at the temple on that bicycle, Police Colonel Veritep Mathawat initially intended to speak with the abbot. However, one of the officers whispered something in his ear, and the colonel abruptly changed his mind. He ordered the police to inspect the monks' huts behind the temple instead. What prompted the colonel to alter his plans? He had learned that the seemingly safe Buddhist temple was actually harboring a dangerous repeat offender. Just prior to the police raid on Wat Tham Kapun, a 46-year-old Austrian tourist, Inga Holacek, had sent a letter to the Ministry of the Interior and the Supreme Patriarch overseeing the Buddhist Sangha, reporting a complaint about a monk at this very temple. In her letter, she stated that during her visit to the cave temple, she had been attacked by one of the monks, who committed an act of sexual violence in front of a Buddha image inside the cave. The incident had occurred on December 7, 1995. The victim explained that she had not reported it sooner out of fear that she herself might be blamed in Thailand and face legal trouble. However, she decided to come forward to ensure that such a crime would not happen again. In her letter, she described the perpetrator's actions and his appearance, noting a distinctive tiger tattoo on his chest. Following the colonel's orders, the officers spread out to search the surrounding area. When they approached a narrow, deep ravine, a foul smell drew their attention, and they carefully descended. There, they discovered the body of a murdered girl. It was Joanne Masheter. Nearby, they found her belongings: a burned passport, a plane ticket, credit cards, the keys to the guest house in Kanchanaburi, and her watch. The police showed the watch to her father. Overwhelmed with grief, Stuart broke down in tears, unable to accept such a tragic truth. He could no longer remain at the temple and returned to the hotel, unable to watch as his daughter's body was carried away. But how had the killer lured Joanne to this dreadful ravine? And how could it be that no one had smelled or discovered the body before? In reality, the murderer had chosen the perfect spot to hide the crime. To understand exactly how it happened, we need to go back in time to December 10th, 1995, the day when it all began. Around 8 a.m. on December 10th, Joanne Masheter left her room at the guest house wearing a white t-shirt, pants, trekking boots, and a backpack on her shoulders. She went downstairs to pay for her stay and promised to return by 11 a.m. After that, she crossed the street and rented a bicycle, planning to return it later the same day. She mounted the bike and followed a trail, crossed a river, and stopped briefly to admire a local attraction, an Allied military base. Finally, she rode another kilometer to her main destination, Wat Tham Kapun. Wat Tham Kapun is situated on a hill with a stunning view of the Kwai River and the infamous Death Railway. Joanne couldn't skip this temple on her sightseeing itinerary, as it is famous for its cave containing 9 rooms with Buddha sculptures, including a reclining Buddha that both Thais and foreigners can visit, as well as a beautifully intricate pier. Upon arriving at the temple, Joanne left her bicycle under a tree and went to explore the pier. Normally crowded with tourists, that day it was relatively empty. While wandering alone, she soon encountered a 21-year-old monk named Fra Yodchart Swafu, nicknamed Tiger. His role at the temple was to greet tourists visiting the site. Since Joanne was the only tourist around, he approached her. He told Joanne that he could show her another religious site, less known but equally beautiful. Under different circumstances, she might have been cautious, but she was in a reputable Buddhist temple and speaking with a modest young monk. Feeling safe, she nodded and followed the tiger. She had no idea that this monk was someone she should have fled from without looking back. Fra Yodchart had only been ordained 8 months earlier. Prior to that, he had served 2.5 years in prison for sexual assault on a foreign tourist. Worse, just 3 days earlier on December 7th, he had attacked Austrian tourist Inge Holacek, not hesitating to reveal his face and the tiger tattoo on his chest. The very tattoo Inge would later describe in her complaint. The modest young monk was in reality a user of illicit substances. Even the saffron robes did not curb his old habits, as he had found companionship with 2 other monks at the temple who shared the same addictions. By the time Joanne arrived, he had already taken the drugs, leaving his mind clouded and focused only on how much money he might find in the backpack of this beautiful young foreign girl. After walking about 100 meters through the wooded area, they stopped at the edge of a deep ravine. The monk suggested that Joanne look down. However, the ravine looked truly frightening, and Joanne ignored his advice. Instead, she simply sat on a rock. Frayodchart had no intention of negotiating. He struck Joanne with his fist. She tried to defend herself, hitting and scratching him, which only further enraged him. He beat her severely and then threw her off the edge from a height of approximately 10 meters. Joanne did not die from the fall. She was still alive and aware of what was happening. She heard footsteps growing closer and realized that she was not alone at the bottom of the ravine. The perpetrator descended to finish what he had started. He grabbed a rock, approached Joanne, and began striking her in the face and neck. After killing her, he attempted to set her body on fire, but the flames stubbornly refused to ignite. Frustrated, he simply covered his victim with branches and whatever else he could find at the bottom. He was confident that no monk or local villager would venture down there, even if they noticed a smell. The ravine had a notorious reputation. Locals often brought dead animals and dumped them there, so a foul odor was always present. And how much had Tiger managed to find in the backpack of the wealthy tourist he had imagined her to be? Only 500 baht. 500 baht for the murder of an innocent, unsuspecting girl. Afterward, Frayodchart returned to the temple, doing his best to act normal and avoid arousing anyone's suspicion. But why hadn't the bicycle, left under the tree for over a month, raised any suspicion? The reason was simple. Tourists often rent bicycles and leave them at the temple, knowing that the rental shop owner will eventually come to retrieve them. As a result, an abandoned bicycle drew no attention. Unfortunately, the letter from Austrian tourist Inga Holchek arrived after Frayodchart had already murdered Joanne. By that time, however, the police had arrested him and brought him in for questioning. During a search of his hut at the temple, the police found illegal substances, a piece of bamboo stained with blood, and a sharp knife. Examination of his past revealed that, in addition to the assault on a foreign tourist, for which he had served 2.5 years in prison, he had also been accused of robbery as a teenager. At just 21 years old and having attacked 2 young women within a 3-day span, there was little hope for his rehabilitation. At first, during the interrogation, the suspect vehemently denied everything, claiming he knew nothing about Joanne's murder. But the police methodically presented all the evidence they had gathered, mentioned Inga Holchek's letter, and pointed out the scratches on the man's shoulder. Clearly, the desperate attempts of Joanne to defend herself before falling from the height. Faced with this, he finally confessed. He explained how he lured Joanne with the promise of showing her local sites, killed her, and took her money and camera. The monk also insisted that, despite his history of sexual offenses, he had not assaulted Joanne. Not everyone believed him, as her body appeared as though it could have been violated, but he stood by his statement. He added that he had been alone when he killed Joanne. His 2 friends, with whom he usually used illicit substances, were not involved. Those 2 monk friends were charged with possession of illegal substances, while Frayodchart was charged with premeditated murder. On March the 23rd, 1996, Joanne's body was returned to the United Kingdom to be buried in her hometown in Cheshire. Meanwhile, in Thailand, news of the monk's crime sparked a scandal. People demanded the removal of the temple abbot, believing he bore responsibility for what had happened, while others argued that he had been unaware of the events. Ultimately, public pressure led to the abbot's resignation. In Thailand, however, it is entirely legal for someone with a criminal record to become a monk. Monastic duties in Thailand are more flexible than in many other countries. Many young men serve in temples or monasteries for a time and may leave voluntarily. Nevertheless, this case prompted the religious community to adopt stricter measures for vetting the backgrounds of newly ordained monks. On March 26, 1996, the murderer sent a letter to the provincial governor expressing guilt and remorse for his actions. He claimed he did not understand what had driven him to commit the crime, perhaps it had been the influence of drugs, and stated that his case should serve as a warning to anyone considering their use. He made it clear that he acknowledged his guilt and, if sentenced to death, would accept it willingly without dispute. He even expressed a wish to be executed within 24 hours at the site of Joanne's death, though this was merely a request. Authorities still had to follow the legal procedure, particularly since all death sentences in Thailand are reviewed by the king, a process that takes time. The trial and sentencing were relatively swift, as the defendant pleaded guilty. While such admissions often result in more lenient punishment, the judge explained that the death penalty was unavoidable, given that the monk had not reformed after his previous prison term for sexual assault. The judge emphasized that the murder had harmed the reputation of both Thailand and the national religion, Buddhism. The former monk was sentenced to death, but the sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment. He eventually fell ill in prison and died there. Many people, including the current residents of Wat Tam Khao Pun, believe that Joanne's spirit never left the temple and continues to reside there. One of the monks claimed to have seen her apparition. One night, a young woman approached him, making a gesture as if inviting him to follow her. The monk got out of bed and followed her through the forest to the site where Joanne had died. However, it was already past midnight, and the monk became frightened. Instead of approaching the ravine, he hurried back. The next morning, he told the senior monks about the incident. Concerned, they gathered together and made offerings to the spirit of the young woman. After that, the strange occurrences ceased and peace returned. Today, Wat Tam Khao Pun remains the main tourist attraction in Kanchanaburi province, popular with both Thai and foreign visitors. However, only the main temple housing the reclining Buddha is open to the public. A fence has been installed in front of the ravine where Joanne died, and access is prohibited. The impact on Thailand's tourism following this crime was significant, affecting the entire country, but it cannot compare to the grief of Joanne's parents, Stuart and Jackie Masheter. The pain of knowing that their daughter's life was taken by a man who used the monk's robes as a cover for his vile acts was unimaginable, especially since the attack occurred in broad daylight, on the last day of Joanne's trip to a country her parents had believed to be safe. Credit must be given to Police Colonel Varathep Mathawat and all the officers in the investigative team who searched for Joanne. Their work in this case was an exemplary model of police professionalism. The Thai police scoured the country, found the girl's body, uncovered the truth of what happened, and brought her killer to justice.